Get ready for the Ochelli effect.
December 18, 2024, allegedly, according to that thing we call a calendar. This is indeed the Ochelli effect. You are the listener there. Of course, most of you catch this via the podcast, but we are live here on a, let's see, what is it? Wednesday, Wednesday, middle of the week, hump day, some people say. Okay. Anyway, it is what it is. It's Wednesday, and that's what it was. And the week that was, and all that good stuff. Look, I've got veteran journalist with me, Albert Lanier. Now, I say veteran journalist, semi-retired at one point, maybe retired completely at another point, but blogging, going out, writing new stuff, going out on Substack, I think. No, wait, he was on Medium. Maybe he was on Substack also. He had a YouTube channel. He did a lot of stuff. Anyway, a lot of different writing Albert Lanier did. And examinations of writing. And a couple of times we even touched on the film industry and stuff like that on the show. And gotta say, though, he's got something a little different this time. Maybe it's not journalism, or maybe it's the art of journalism via that which you can create through another medium, which is indeed film, the visual, audio, and other immersive experience that comes along with creating a film. Oh, and they write stuff for that too, folks. Just saying. And I don't just watch documentaries all the time. I do watch other types of movies as well. But anyway, Albert Lanier, how you doing, first of all? And secondly, what is going on? Are we looking for new territory to conquer? Is that what's going on?
Oh, hi, Chuck. How are you? In terms of new territory to conquer, no. I wasn't looking for the new territory. It seems like the new territory has found me. So what happened was this, a little bit of a long story here. So I was supposed to go to a film festival in Vegas a couple of months ago. I have I guess I should even backtrack from that to set that up. I have gone into podcasting to an extent. I have a podcast called Final Cut, just part of what I'm here to promote, as well as my as well as what I'm going to state next, but or later on. So I have a podcast called Final Cut, which has been around since June of 2024. But June of 2024. And that, of course, is a accompaniment. It's a companion piece to Final Cut newsletter. That's a newsletter on Substack, which is a film newsletter.
Okay.
And it is my return to writing about film, because I used to be a film critic for about 2002 to 2010. I was covering film festivals as a journalist and as a film critic, also for about 15 years in general, complete. And
you were covering films and festivals for films in Hawaii in the early 2000s?
That's correct.
Oh, okay. I wasn't.
Yeah.
You know what? I vaguely remember that you wrote a couple of pieces that were critiques
and
of
also
films.
in the 1990s.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. But the thing is, I vaguely remember that you had written some critiques of films, but I thought that was just, a general part of what you might have done. I mean, a journalist is a journalist, so whatever you're reporting on, you're reporting on. But that's interesting. I didn't realize you were also following around film festivals, or that, that you could dedicate yourself to something like that, because I don't usually think of Hawaii for film, actually.
There are a number of TV shows that were shot and done here. Everybody knows Hawaii Five-0 and Magnum PI and all that.
Sure.
It's a small film community here because you get a modest amount of films that come every year. They always want to they always want more productions to come to Hawaii, right? More work for the crews that are here, more work for the filmmakers. And, of course, you have local filmmakers here in Hawaii. It's not a hub like, I think you're in Georgia, right? if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, see, I was just going to say, it's certainly not like the entertainment industry that's been built here in Georgia, not just in Atlanta, but throughout the state. They've actually, gone through a time period here where they attracted a lot of productions, everything from The Walking Dead to the Turner Universe to, the cartoons, the Made in Georgia cartoons and everything that has been produced here in Georgia. I mean, Georgia by itself competes with the entire country of Canada when it comes to, the film industry, right? Mm-hmm. So, again, I just don't think of Hawaii. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist there. I just don't think of it. Yeah.
Well, again, you have to understand, I was covering film festivals there. So Hawaii Film Festival, Hawaii International Film Festival, and a couple other film festivals there. And I ended up becoming a film critic, like I said, when I was about 32. And I was an online film critic up until I was 40. And I was covering film festivals before that as a journalist, because I had been on your show previously, and I talked about how I learned about filmmaking when I was a kid. I had taken a course at the library, and I had learned basic filmmaking techniques, essentially. I learned filmmaking. I was 12 or 13 years old, right? But I came out of that course, that class, without, I didn't have a video camera. I didn't have a film camera. So without a video and a film camera, I couldn't really become a filmmaker. And what I wound up doing was going to film festivals, first when I was 15 and then when I was 17.
Right.
I was with the film festivals prior to becoming a journalist in 1994. I did there from about the time I was 17 to the time I was 23. Okay. So that was sort of like my grad school. If my class at the library was my undergrad, the class, going to the festival, meeting filmmakers and watching movies and learning there was kind of like grad school. And I used to say film school. I call it grad school now. So when I became a journalist in 94, I started covering film festivals. And I did that up until I was about 40. And so I say all this because I want people to understand that I have a certain kind of background in regards to film. So I'm not just someone who's a film fan, really. I was never really a pure film buff. Like, even when I was a young kid, I wasn't really into films other than, oh, that looks good, let's go watch that, or wanting to see movies.
Okay, so
I wasn't into movies per se. It wasn't until I was 12 and 13 and I took the course at the library.
So you weren't engaged in a particular...
That I was into filmmaking.
You weren't into filmmaking, and you also weren't engaged in any particular type of fandom where, you were just a fan of, say, a certain genre or something like that. Mm-hmm. You didn't do that. You just you'd want to be entertained once in a while, and a film was a good idea, and it was a good thing to cover, and you could enjoy a film or two. I get it. Right. Fine. And the Final Cut, by the way, is that available just pretty much where any podcast is available, the Final Cut?
Yeah, Final Cut is available on Spotify. You can check out the first season. Hopefully there'll be a second. First season is 10 episodes. So it's very easy because, strangely enough, it's a combination of interviews. I interview a indie screenwriter, who's a friend of mine, and also an actress / filmmaker who's also a new friend of mine. So I interview both of them. I also read their audio versions of some of my reviews and some of my essays. So it's pretty easy. I mean, I have to admit, some of the episodes are easy because it's like 8-9 minutes. Right. So because I'm reading, reading my articles. So that's the reason I did it. I never wanted to be a podcaster. I shouldn't admit that, but I am a podcaster. But I never wanted to be a podcaster.
It seems like everybody ends up making a podcast at this point, to be honest with you. And the funny thing is that when I started podcasting, because I'm kind of a podcast veteran at this point, there were no seasons. There were none of these plans. People just did what they did, and they had theme music or whatever, and that was about it. Mm-hmm. Right. And okay. Anyway, back to it though, because those things are available, and that's on Spotify. And again, there's a Substack
and
also.
On Substack, yes, you can go to, for Final Cut. You can go to. I'll say it at the end of the program, of course, but right now I want to mention that Final Cut can be found at allanier.substack.com. That's allanier.substack.com.
Got it.
And also on Spotify.
Great. And I'll put the links to both of those in the show notes for you guys, so you can scroll down to the show notes on this podcast and go ahead and click on them and go check out Albert's work there, Mr. Lanier's work there. Anyways, back to it, though. So you got this going. And this is of interest, but what is happening here? I mean, now you're getting into the inner workings, though. It's not just film review, although you're doing some film review. I mean, what's
a
next?
little bit, yeah, for Final Cut.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a retro review section, and I did that reluctantly. I didn't want to review movies again, but right. I'm open to being a film critic again. People want, a reviewer, and if the price is right,
Hey, look,
I can do that.
Totally understand, but we need some honest film reviewers here, because, I mean, I'm seeing some awful crap already. I mean, I'm looking at previews of Gladiator 2 and wondering what the hell happened.
Well, let me just briefly speak to that before I get to it, because I'm not here to talk about film reviewing and film critics, but I stopped being a reviewer and a critic in 2010 when I was about 40.
Okay.
And recently, what I found out when I came back to writing about film this year with Final Cut, it's what's occurred with all of these YouTube reviewers and movie talkers and all of these people. You have a bunch of young and dumb people, and that may sound harsh. I don't care. I'm being harsh. You have a bunch of young and dumb people who know nothing about movies, who know absolutely nothing about filmmaking, and who are basically, a number of them are paid minions from the major studios. They're basically bought and sold by the majors to essentially be kind of human billboards, or human ads, or human radio ads. That seems like a contradiction, but basically they're just walking advertisements or sitting advertisements for movies. They're not real reviewers.
Right.
And some of them don't even want to be called critics. Thank goodness, because they're not.
Well, but they're not
they're
critics.
Basically completely worthless and useless people in regards to the film industry. And it's a demonstration of what's occurred. It's a deterioration in the standards of looking at movies. Well, unfortunately, that's occurred.
Okay, but they're not useless to the industry, Mr. Lanier. They're
useful. They're useful idiots to the industry.
Exactly. Okay, I thought you were saying they were useless to the industry, because they're useful to the industry.
They're useless to everyone else.
Right.
They're useful to the industry. They're useful idiots to the industry.
Well, let me see if I can describe what it is that I've seen and see if you and I are seeing the same thing, because I recognize that what has happened here with some of these YouTube people is they get a little bit of traction as sort of like a super fan. The guy who's got the all of the merch behind him, who's got shelves and shelves of the action figures or whatever it is that's attached to a particular grouping of movies or a universe of movies or whatever, and they're a super fan on YouTube, and they get an audience going, and the next thing you know is they get cooperation from the product that they're buying, that they are a super fan from. And that's what they really are. They become that walking billboard, like you said. Almost you have to picture the guy walking around with a sandwich board, advertising that product, because that's all he's doing, is advertising the product, because he's a super fan of the product. And that's all there is. It's not a critique. It's not informative. He's just a 20-minute or 15-minute ad for the film, really. And, oh, by the way, they stack more ads into it. And when they have a new part of the universe that comes out, or they have a new television show that's an offshoot, Star Wars is probably the best example of this. I mean, the only way you can keep track of whatever Apple is releasing next in the Star Wars universe, right, or Disney, is in Disney, I mean to say. The only way to keep track of what Disney's going to pump out next out of that, ridiculous Star Wars factory is to keep track of the super fans, because if you start watching a guy now, or if you start watching him 6 months from now, they're going to insert the new commercials in there, and that's all it is. It's a vehicle for the commercials and for the product itself. It's like product placement within the product. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
Like what they've done, I think you explained that very effectively. What they've done as somebody who used to be a contributor to the film website Ain't It Cool News, and like I said, I was a reviewer on that site for that site for about 8 years.
Okay.
What they've done is the studios have colonized the online film world. So what they've done is they are able to take the people on YouTube, the individual units, so to speak, and they can co-opt them. And so they're co-opting all these online entities, all these online channels, all these online shows.
Right.
And they're co-opting them, and they're basically either giving them flights to premieres where they can sit down with stars of the film or do stand-up, meaning stand-up interviews with stars of the film, or giving them merch, or giving them, or outright paying them. And so what they've done is colonize and co-opt and completely amalgamate the online world into the studio. I call it a new studio system, not the old studio system.
Exactly.
But that's what they've done.
Exactly.
So that's why you have these fools like Chris Stuckman, and you have the Critical Drinker. You have these personalities who are waste of spaces.
Well, and
who are completely useless and worthless.
And here's something.
Something like Chris Stuckman has said, he didn't want to do negative reviews.
Well,
no reviewer, no film critic in their right mind would ever announce that to you.
Well, absolutely
not. They would never say that. But this is because these people don't really want to be reviewers. Those two don't want to be reviewers. They want to be filmmakers.
Well, look,
and they're working on films as we speak.
Well,
so they don't want to cut off the pipeline to where they can get their product distributed, or possibly get their product distributed, whether it's the majors or whether it's any of the other mini majors or minor companies in the Hollywood constellation and in the film industry here.
Well,
so that's what you got to understand about these people.
Well, yeah, you're correct about all that, except I got another question here, which is a big point of interest in my mind. And look, you and I both kind of appreciate Star Trek, right? And I got to say, if you look at that universe, okay, of stuff online, they have that completely locked down where, look, they have their merch that's coming out. They have new TV shows. Paramount, as a streaming service, feeds them some guests for their podcast, right? The stars of the shows. Feeds them a couple other things. Does pay them a little bit. Does send them some free merch. They'll send them Star Trek uniform shirts so they can wear them in their videos. And they got a very low-paying guy working constantly to create content, which does nothing but sell their products, not just the online streaming service, but also the toys and the collectibles and the conventions and everything. So, and all it takes is give them a little bit of access that maybe Entertainment Tonight used to have. Okay. Right. Now, does anybody even watch that show anymore?
In regards to the fandom, like the fan aspect, Star Trek fan, it's very different. Like, those aren't reviewers. They're not critics. They're not trying to be, most of them are not trying to be film professionals. I can say this as somebody who is a certified Star Trek fan, and has been to a Star Trek convention, and has also been to my local Comic-Con and also at Anime-Con. I can tell you that it's different with fans. It's different with people who are just plain fans, not people who are trying to be filmmakers, not people who call themselves film reviewers, not try to be filmmakers or directors or producers or anything like that. When you're talking about absolute straightforward fans of Star Wars, Star Trek, doesn't really matter what, it's very different. If the studios want to give them access, if the studios want to help them out with merch or all that kind of stuff, I'm all for that.
Well, but
because those people aren't trying to impact movies. They're not the problem. Fans are never the problem. It's the fans who try to become film critics and reviewers and filmmakers that are the problem. Those are the people.
I think you might have missed out.
They're probably not really fans either.
Okay, I think you might have missed out on something here. Okay, because there is a whole universe of Star Trek people that make Star Trek movies. Independent Star Trek movies.
The fan movies. Yeah, that's true.
Right?
Again, I don't have a problem with that.
Oh no,
I don't have a problem.
I'm bringing it up just to say that at the end of the day, all that stuff is some online content that the majority is not even paid for by the studio, that is doing what? Serving to sell their products. I'm not saying that
I understand that.
I'm not saying that the fans don't have an honest love for the for the genre, for the for the films, for the characters, for the universe. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that at the end of the day, that has now been turned into an industry in and of itself that is there to do what? Make more money for the big boys. Is still Paramount is going to make its money off of these guys and these fan films that they used to be so afraid if they made them that they would take away from the big films or whatever. They're not afraid of that anymore. They're now using it as a stepping stone. I mean, I even saw the other day, I remembered that one of these independent fan films even got Nichelle Nichols before she died to appear in one of their films. And, they were totally thrilled just because they got to meet Nichelle Nichols. But the idea is, though, that bolstered the Star Trek canon. That added to it. Right? That became something else. I mean, and it doesn't even have to appear on IMDb and anything else. And these guys put their own money into these projects and everything else because they're into the fandom so much. But they figured out a way now to not just sell these people junk or sell them merch. They figured out a way to get them to sell their own merch for stuff, pay them for it, and pay for their own stuff while they're making it independently and just create giant ads. Because now...
Well, that I'm not really surprised with. That aspect doesn't really surprise. Like I said, I've been to conventions.
Yeah, of course.
So I see it. So it doesn't bother me. I'm not an unrealistic person. Like I said, I was a film critic and reviewer for 8 years.
Yeah.
And I've been around filmmakers. I've met a couple of people from the studios.
Right.
So I'm not someone who has a sort of, that maybe like these fans and has a purist kind of view or an unrealistic view. My view is realistic. The problem that I have is you don't have the kind of quality reviewers and critics, or very few of them, that you had before.
Oh, fair enough.
That's the problem.
I'm just trying to recognize the ever shifting sands of what's going on in the media universe, right? And that's always important. Is to recognize that, look, if this happened 20 years ago, this is the way it would have went down. If it happened 40 years ago, it would have not happened, et cetera. In the days when nobody had access to video cameras at all, it was difficult to make a 10-minute film, right? But today, that's nothing, and you can throw it up and you can put it on YouTube, and 1 million people could see it within 24 hours, depending on if you get a little traction, right? So, I mean, it's a different world, is all I'm saying.
Right.
And I'm just pointing out the different.
I think we all agree on that, so that's not the problem.
Yeah, no, not at all.
It's a different world, but the differences that have occurred are negative and have horrible repercussions.
Right.
And the lack of quality reviewing in terms of film reviews and movie reviews and criticism, that's an issue. But that's a longer issue. And I've got to get to the reason that I'm here. As interesting as this conversation is,
okay, no problem.
Fascinating as it is, I got to get to the reason that it is. I've allowed myself to get off track.
Sorry. Let's get into it. Let's get into the real reason why you're here. What is it that's important about the quality reviews and all that? Go ahead, tell us about it. I'm listening.
Well, I'm here to talk about my screenwriting, strangely enough, my new screenwriting structure, which is called dual story structure.
Okay.
And dual story structure is basically two basic story structures that are intended in the writing of screenplays. So I've completely unexpectedly, found myself dealing with screenplays. And I have to be brutally honest. I will admit this, it's obvious, that I'm not a screenwriter, nor am I a TV writer. I'm a journalist and a former film critic and reviewer. So
okay.
I make no pretensions to being a part of the industry or anything like that.
Okay. So tell me why you're involved with screenwriting then.
Well, it really was an idea that came to me when I was watching I was watching one of my favorite channels on YouTube, and it's one I like. I guess I could say it, James Whale Bake Sale, and you have celebrities and filmmakers talk about movies. And I was thinking about something that I had responded to on X or Twitter, where I go on film that. And I had responded to something someone had said about Psycho, the movie Psycho, and the Marion Crane character.
Okay.
And it got me thinking about story, because I was saying, oh, yeah, when she took the money in Psycho, she was able, it made her go on the run, and she was able to go off to the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a good way to get her to the Bates Motel. And that got me thinking. And then I thought about screenplays that I had. I thought about this student film festival that I had covered years ago when I was a journalist. And one of the events that I was at was that I sat in on was a screenwriting course taught by a guy called Ty Holler of the Vancouver Film Group. And I learned about screenwriting through that course, even though I wasn't there to learn about screenwriting. And when I thought about those two, then I started thinking about what became dual story structure. So it really stemmed from thinking about those two aspects.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I always thought about the Marion Crane character and the money as being, a convenient plot device in order to, massage her into a place where she's going to go to an out-of-the-way hotel, not the typical Holiday Inn, if you will, or, a Circle 8 motel or whatever they would have had at that time. I don't know. But either way, it gave her a reason to maybe search out that out-of-the-way sort of, independent hotel which used to exist, right? And I was thinking, that makes perfect sense, but it's just, I think of it as a device, right? It's the excuse to put a character, to put a situation in motion. And that's just the way things are. You have your setup when it comes to a film, right? Here, we're going to introduce you to the characters in a way. They might do it through exposition. They might do it through a situation where you get to know the character, where she says at some point she's married, she's not married. You learn that. Does she have kids? Where is she going? What is she doing? So on and so forth. And, now there's a bit of a problem, so therefore now we have an excuse for where we're going to set up next. And that's, part of everything. There's always that setup, right? You go into the movie, and now you're going to go into another world, whether it's, part of the universe that you personally exist in, or it's another one. They have to establish things. So they do that. Okay. And this is always part of, any film pretty much that's decent, usually, right? I mean, there are some unusual story structures, but okay. So you're thinking about this, and go ahead, continue.
All right. So that was the sort of inciting incident, to use screenwriting language,
right,
for how this came about. Because I thought about, so basically dual story structure deals with two story structures in regards to writing the script. Now, the thing that I note about a dual story structure, and there's an introductory essay which can be found at my Substack. It's called Dual Story Structure, a method for screenwriting, and it can be found at allanier.substack.com.
Okay.
In any event, basically what dual story structure is, again, it's a two-pronged structure, which could really be used for any kind of a script, any kind of a story in regards to film, right? Now, the controversy for this, besides the fact that I, a person who is not a screenwriter and TV writer, come up with a story structure. The other aspect that might be controversial is I believe that you can use this story structure also to write TV scripts. So it's not just film, it's also TV. But the two aspects are basically this. Mm-hmm. There's what I call PRS, problem, reaction, solution.
Of course.
The second structure, that structure, PRS, problem, reaction, solution, is structure A. Mm-hmm. Structure B is what I call SAR, which is situation, action, resolution.
Okay.
So those are the two story structures, because not all films would fall within the range of problem, reaction, solution, or situation, action, resolution, right? So one might be one, another might be the other. So dual story structure, that's that title or the name of this. So let me just define these two structures so that people have an understanding of it. The first structure, structure A, we start with problem. And what a problem is it is a predicament that, I'll use the term individuals instead of characters. Most people in screenwriting, I'm not a screenwriting instructor or teacher, so I try to use stuff that's not necessarily pure jargon.
Okay.
A problem is a predicament that the individuals in the story or in the film face. Okay?
Okay.
So that's the definition of the problem. A situation that the characters, that's what it's popularly known as, that the individuals in the story must face.
Now, I've heard somebody else describe this as conflict and confrontation and then resolution.
Right.
You know, and that it sounds very similar, right?
Right. It could be, but like I said, this is just my structure. This is my way of doing it.
Okay.
Like, there are many different kinds of screenplay ideas out there. There are many different kinds of approaches. What I'm dealing here with dual story structure is at the screenplay level and at the story level. So what this is used is to help write the screenplay, like a basic schematic in helping you to write the screenplay. Right? It doesn't write it. You know, it's not a program. You don't insert dual story structure into your computer and it writes the script for you. Nothing will write the script for you. Right? So what it is a structure that helps you with the screenplay, that helps you write the screenplay, right? So you mentioned conflict. Conflict would be a part of the problem, but it's also a part of the overall story, because there may be more than one conflict, right? You could have an essential conflict, which is what it's about. But when it comes to movies, what you have is in this structure, what you have is the problem. And the problem is the predicament. There may be conflicts that ensue as a result of the predicament or problem. But it's not simply conflict, right? Conflict is a part of films, but it isn't, like I said, I'm sure different screenplay instructors and different screenwriters have their own way of explaining and doing things.
Right.
Like I said, this is my structure. So the problem we start out with in this structure is a predicament.
Okay.
Okay? That's the predicament.
Gotcha. Now, one could say sometimes that when, you're talking about the parallel or the dual, occasionally what happens is they cross over into one another, right? Let's go back to Psycho. You got the Marion Crane story where she's left, she's absconded with the money, now she's in this out-of-the-way hotel, she's creeped out, she meets Norman Bates. Well, he's got a whole thing going on. And his whole thing, right, is about, my mother's up there. And we don't know it yet. We learn later, obviously, what really that means and everything. But my mother's up there. Oh, she's a problem. I'm trying to run the hotel, Oh, this place is run down. It's not very busy, His whole thing is going on. A little more boring than somebody absconding with a payroll. But still, right, it's two different stories going on in the same world, and they're about to connect.
Well, here's what I would argue about Psycho.
Okay.
Psycho, I would argue, basically switches protagonist. Because if you look at the Marion Crane individual, she is the protagonist of the film. She's the main character. But what happens in Psycho? She gets killed off.
In the first
few minutes. And what happens in the film is Norman Bates thus becomes the protagonist.
Right.
So when she came to that hotel, he was essentially like a supporting player. But now it becomes, after she dies, he becomes the protagonist because we're seeing the film, if not necessarily through his eyes, but he is the focal point of the movie. Even though the Crane character is important because her sister Lila is looking for her, right?
See, but
so I would argue that they switch protagonists. That's one of the tricks of that movie, and that's why I think it's one of the more effective screenplays in regards to horror movies,
right?
Or that sort of that was the proto slasher movie,
right?
Really.
And at the time, extremely unique because Janet Leigh, who was put out there as a star of the movie, right, is dead within a few minutes. So, your main protagonist, hey, this person's here. Now, usually that means you're going to follow them through the story. Nope. She's gone. So now, hey, here's the other protagonist. The dual story doesn't last long in Psycho, I guess, right?
Well, it depends on how you wish to see that. You could see Psycho as a problem, reaction, solution film, or you could see it as a situation, action, resolution film. It really depends on which one you want to use it for. But I'm looking at it more in terms of the overall looking at it from the protagonist's point of view.
Okay.
It really becomes a movie where the protagonists are switched. You go from one protagonist to another. And that's why it's tricky. Psycho is a tricky movie because it switches protagonists, in my view. It switches main characters.
Well, right.
So that's interesting.
And then the next thing that happens is now you're following a police investigation, which is now in conflict with the Norman Bates story, which is its own arc. So now they've eliminated one and replaced it with another, you'd say. Yeah? Okay.
So, we have the problem. And I'm going to I'll use my essay and examples in the essay to illustrate both PRS and SAR. So we have the problem, which is a predicament that the characters, aka individuals, have to face or have to deal with or have to get out of, right?
Okay.
Then you have the reaction, and the reaction would be defined as emotions, feelings, and efforts. Meaning it's emotions, feelings about their predicament and efforts to get out of this predicament. So the resolution would technically be, the reaction would be most of the movie. So we go back, we have the problem, which is a predicament that the individuals must face or they are stuck in. Then we have the reaction, which is not only the emotions, feelings, and aspects that these individuals go through as a result of this predicament, but their efforts to get out of the predicament. And then we get to the last part, which is solution. And solution is a way out of the predicament. This solution can come from the individuals, meaning the characters, or meaning basically internal, or it could be external. It could come from some force outside of those characters. So that's the basic rundown of what problem, reaction, solution is, right? Structure A of dual story structure. So let's go on to structure B, which is situation, action, resolution. Let us define situation. Situation is any kind of event or activity that the individuals are involved with. So right away, we're seeing this is very different from problem, reaction, solution, right? Problem is a predicament. It's an issue. It's something that serves as not just a stumbling block, but a series of stumbling blocks, a series of obstacles, a series of aspects that they have to wrestle with or forced to wrestle with, right? A situation is any event or activity that the characters are involved with or deal with, right? So a situation could be anything, right? In television, what do they call comedies? Situation comedy, because the situation may vary. A show like MASH is one situation, and a show like Seinfeld is another. So now that's different because I'm not talking about television. That's a whole different dual story structure. It's the same dual story structure of problem, reaction, solution, and situation, action, resolution, but it's a different kind of approach that I have to take to explaining that. So maybe I'll come back one of these days and do that. Okay. But anyway, we have the situation, right? It's any event or activity that the individuals are involved with or find themselves dealing with in some way. Could be anything, right? It's not as specific. It could be specific, but it's not as specific. So actions is, we're moving to action. Action is literally physical, demonstrable activity. Somebody does something physically. It could also be possibly emotional or intellectual or mental. But it's something the character does. So defines as something an individual or character does. Normally, it would be physical activity, like action, right? And action that is taken, right? But it could be other things. Okay. Could be intellectual, could be emotional, could be, right?
Sure.
Something the individual does, definition of action. Resolution is the conclusion to and end to whatever activity, whatever event, whatever the individuals have been involved with.
Okay.
And what's tricky about a resolution is a resolution could not necessarily resolve something. So you could have a cliffhanger, or you could have an end of the movie that doesn't, quote unquote, solve anything. But it is a resolution because it is the end of the movie. And it's an end at that point to what the individuals, a.k.a. characters, are involved with.
Okay, now does this differ a little bit when you're dealing with a singular contained presentation like a movie? Does it differ when you, say, do it with a TV series where a story arc might develop over the course of 10, 15, 20 episodes even? Like, you know, for instance, one of my favorite shows was The Sopranos. And, you know, you had a sort of overall story arc over the course of the season, but each individual show also had individual things that may or may not have come to a resolution by the end of that 1 hour piece. So you had little stops along the way, ultimately building up to what you hoped was a resolution at the end of the season. You know, something like that. Is that different in any way, or is it just stretched out longer?
Well, yeah. So let me just briefly, because I think that's a very good question, because I did say that both situation, action, resolution, and situation, action, resolution, and problem, reaction, solution apply to television too. It can be used in television. Right. In television, it's basically in two ways. Well, number one would be the pilot of the show, the opening, the pilot of the show. That would be its own SAR and or its PRS, right? To use the synonyms, to use the acronyms there. So, well, synonyms really. So the initials. So you would do either one of those structures, structure A or structure B. Structure A being PRS. Problem, reaction, solution. Structure B being situation, action, resolution.
Okay.
You would use the structure for the pilot and then individual episodes. So it would be so every episode you can use, depending on the kind of show you're doing, whether it's SAR or whether it's PRS. You would do that for every episode that you write.
Right.
So every episode. So if you've got, I don't know how many episode shows are these days. It varies from show to show.
Yeah, it depends.
Let's just say you got 15 episodes, right?
Your network, look at it this way. Your network shows run like 20-something episodes still in a lot of cases.
Normally be like 22. It used to be 26 years ago.
Yeah.
It used to be over 30 years ago.
Well, absolutely. Sometimes you had 35. But now there are streaming shows that only, say, run 10 or 12 episodes for an entire
10,
season.
12, 15. So let's get in between there and say say 15, right? So for all 15 seasons of season 1 of, let's just call it Chuck. I know there's a show called Chuck, but let's call this new show Chuck.
Sure, why not?
Why not, right? Another Chuck.
A different one.
So 15 seasons of Chuck, right? We would use the either one of those structures, structure A or B, problem, reaction, solution, or situation, action, resolution for every episode of that show to write the script. That could be used for everyone. So you use it for the pilot, and you use it for every episode. And that would be how. Whereas with a film, you're just using it on a draft-by-draft basis, right? So you're writing a film, you know, depending on how many drafts you use or how many drafts you write or how much a production would use, you would do it for every draft, right? You use it for every draft. I mean, once you get from draft to draft to draft, you probably wouldn't need to, like, use it as much in terms of the structure of it. It'd be more like shorthand. So what you would do, you could also probably use this for outline and for treatments, too, especially in television. Again, what this is a basic story structure. So I don't want to stress this. Before you use something like a dual story structure, and I hope this is the case, you should already know screenwriting. In other words, you should know what a protagonist, antagonist is, what a climax is, what a denouement or climax or denouement, what an inciting incident is. You should know all of these. You should know basic screenwriting before you attempt to actually write a script and use dual action structure. Because you can't learn if you don't know what 3-act structure is. Yes, dual story structure does fit within the confines of 3-act structure. But this is not 3-act structure. 3-act structure is 3-act structure. If you don't know what an Act 1, Act 2, or Act 3 is, and you don't understand that, you're going to be lost using this.
Yeah, well, this will get confusing because if you try and run an ABC 3 plots, okay, you try and run your ABC plots, your main story, then there's a subplot to that story, and then a sort of extra background story to it. I mean, that gets very complicated, especially if you're going to apply a dual story structure to each one of those 3 plot lines. I mean, that's very complex, and quite frankly...
Well, again, this is very basic. So this is like a basic exoskeleton and basic narrative exoskeleton that you use to help write the screenplay. That's it.
Okay.
It doesn't write it for you. It doesn't provide anything beyond a basic framework. That's what it's intended for. That's why I say it's basic story structure, right?
Right.
Because you got to come up with the characters. You have to come up with the plot points. You have to come up with where the arc is going to be, whether it's a film or in the TV scripts. Right. You're going to have to come up with all that stuff. And all it does is provide you with that structure, that 3-column, what I call 3 columns. It matches up with 3-act structure, right?
Okay.
So let's take a look at structure A. Problem, Act 1, reaction, Act 2, solution, Act 3.
Now, where in this do you fit establishment? Where, look, in order to understand what's going on here, you're going to have to know who the players are, right? In order to establish a protagonist, you got to get to know that protagonist. This is this person. This is who they are. This is what they're about. This is the world they live in.
Right.
Where do you do that in this structure?
Well, that's where you help flesh it out. So let's sort of begin to put this into action.
Okay.
Let's put this in action a little, right?
Sure.
So let me use the examples that I used in my essay, again, to be found at allanier.substack.com, called Dual Story Structure.
Right. And it's also advertised. So, it's also advertised on your Instagram, by the way. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's correct. So I'm also on my Instagram, right? It's found on my Instagram, which is writer Al Lanier, and also found at on my Substack, right? So let's use the example. Like I said, I'll use both examples for my answer.
Mm.
Let's look at Jaws, the movie Jaws.
Okay.
So we start out with Jaws, right?
Mm.
The problem. Now, when you're using this structure, I would assume that you already, as a writer, have some characters, right?
Well, okay, so what you're saying is before we get to the problem, you got to establish here's the town, here's the beach, here's the cops and the power structure, which they sort of did.
You have to have an idea, some basic ideas, right?
Mm.
So you have this concept of, okay, you have this idea. You have the idea. Well, Jaws is based on a novel by Peter Benchley.
Right.
So let's imagine that Jaws was an original idea.
Sure.
So you have this idea about this town that has been the subject of shark attacks, right? So we start out, and you have some ideas for the characters. That's when you start to begin to use the dual story structure. You can't use it in the absence of characters or an idea, or some ideas about the plot. You have to have some basic concepts about what your story might be and what you're looking to do. It is not going to create a story for you.
If you're doing some basic,
again, it's structure.
It's
not going to create it for you. It's structure.
Unless you're doing a very unconventional sort of storytelling where you don't bother to establish the characters, you just, let them pass by. You do sort of drive-bys on them, and they establish a universe as a collective, something like that.
That's why you have SAR, situation, action, resolution.
Right, because you can establish a situation without all that other stuff. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Right. So we have Jaws. Okay, let's look at the problem in Jaws. What's the problem? That there is a small town,
beach town. They need the revenue. There's people there. They're trying to enjoy. The problem is it's dangerous. And why is it dangerous?
Right, but what you're beginning to do is flesh things out.
Oh, okay.
I'm starting out from the very beginning.
All right.
So there's a small beach town that's the subject of attacks. Let's get a little bit more specific. Not too specific, but a little bit more specific. There's a East Coast town that has been impacted by a wave of shark attacks on swimmers. Okay? That's the problem. Okay? So what you do from that point is this, because you've already thought about the characters. You've already begun to think about the basic aspects of plot. Okay. So you extrapolate from that point in the problem. Now, often screenwriting books, you hear the cliche, what happens next? What I stress is what happened. Not simply what happens next, but what happened. That's the question that screenwriters need to answer in the script. You have to answer what happened. Because when you're dealing with people at studios, they're going to say, okay, what happened here? Why does this character do this if you get that far? Why does it happen? Certainly, if you're going to pitch, sometimes they're going to ask questions. But even if you have a draft, if you have something written, they look at the script, they go, okay, what happened here or what happens here? So you have to solve the problem and you have to answer the question of what happened. So we look at this problem. Okay, let's flesh it out more, right? Okay. We get from that point. Okay, it's an East Coast town. All right, it's a town called Amity. And it's like a Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard type town. Right. Okay, you're talking about specific East Coast, like Massachusetts area, that area. Okay. Right. And they've got a shark attack, so that's impacting them. Yeah, a couple of swimmers have been killed.
See, for me though, the problem actually is not the shark attack primarily. The problem is that they have to have this beach open. Okay, that's what the deal is first.
Well, that gets to the resolution. See, now guess what you're doing?
What am I doing?
You're thinking about the story. You're doing what you're looking at the aspects of the plot, and you're beginning to put things together. You're beginning to analyze. Okay, now this issue is this. So we get to the reaction, and the reaction is that the town's Amity, we now call this Amity, the town's police chief wants to go after the shark, but gets static or gets runs into opposition from the town mayor and town officials. Okay, so that gets into the point that you mentioned. Okay, we've got a police chief, Brody, I believe his name was in the movie.
Brody.
So he's looking at this and going, "This isn't good. People are dying. You got a couple people dying. This is terrible. The shark has got to be killed, at the very least dealt with, right?"
Right.
And he also brings in a marine biologist or a scientist, Richard Dreyfuss,
right,
played by Richard Dreyfuss. He's brought in to take a look at this situation. But the mayor, played by Murray Hamilton, is concerned because it's summertime and that's tourist season, and he wants the beach kept up. See, what we're doing is we're extrapolating, right? We're looking at this aspect and we're filling in things. Right, we're working on. Okay,
he's rushing to resolve it ahead of it actually being resolved because of that conflict with we need to keep the beach open for the business, otherwise we're going to have problems here. That's what's going on, right?
Right. So he's concerned about tourism because the tourism part of the lifeblood of Amity.
That's what they need.
Part of how they make their money. It's an important part of the vital part of the town's economy.
Right.
And he doesn't want that economy ruined. That's why he says at one point in the movie, he says this will be open, I think, in July or whatever.
Right. If they're tourism,
he just said, "Now you can't do it." But eventually, Brody gets to say so to go out there and deal with the shark.
But only
so
after,
what happens with the solution? What happens with the solution? We get to the solution. The shark is destroyed, right?
Yeah.
Shark is destroyed. But in the solution, you have to think about what happens. So how does the shark get destroyed? How does the shark get killed? Well, you know that Brody plus the scientist plus a local boat owner played by Robert Shaw goes out there to deal with the shark.
Yeah, the crusty boat captain and the marine biologist who knows everything but isn't really a hard guy that can, do things really well with his hands. And eventually what happens is they wind up kicking that tank into the shark's mouth, right, and trying to blow him up.
Right.
So
see what you're doing? Yeah. See what you're doing?
Okay.
You're beginning to fill in the details.
Okay.
So we've moved from problem with the shark in the town, the problem, which is the shark, a shark in an East Coast town,
right?
Shark attacks in an East Coast town, to the reaction, which is that the police chief wants to deal with the shark attack, but is met with opposition by the mayor and local officials.
Which is the conflict between the sheriff and the local officials, but also a conflict because they're sticking people in the water at a time when if they just pulled them out of the water, problem is solved that way too.
Right.
But
I got you. That's where conflict, because you mentioned conflict earlier.
Right.
That's where conflict comes in.
Okay.
Because where conflict is a part of, again, I don't use conflict as part of the structure. Conflict is a part of the movie. Mm-hmm. So conflict can be anywhere in a movie, but it's not a part of the structure.
Right.
I don't explicitly say conflict because conflict will be in the movie.
Well, you
create the conflict.
You have
find the conflict.
Well, you have
the problem leads to the conflict. But what you're doing is precisely how precisely what the structure is intended to do in regard to screenwriting. You're coming up with the details. You're coming up with the plot points. You're coming up with the aspects of this. Now, granted, we're talking about a movie that's already been out, and it was a huge hit.
Right.
But see how this is working? See the point of the structure. Again, the point of the structure is not to give you all the answers. It's to allow you to fill in the details.
Gotcha.
You look at this way. You examine that. Okay, my character will that and get you to think critically in the formation and shaping of the script.
Right.
That's part of what dual story structure does.
Exactly. Okay.
So that's his job.
All right. So
the way you reacted to it is it was right on the dot. It is right on the money. That's precisely what I want. That's what I want writers to do. That's what I want to be able to. I want them to be able to do that.
Excellent.
Now, granted, we're talking about a movie that's been out for years.
Yeah, absolutely,
right?
absolutely. Look, and I'm glad that we got to do this because, look, at least we show them exactly what it is you're trying to go after here in regards to what it is you're demonstrating there on Substack. And just for the record, I mean, that came out in 1975, Jaws, and I think I saw it as a little kid. Maybe I was 4 or 5 when I first saw it, years old. Anyway, old movie for sure, and it's very interesting. There's lots of different conflicts in it and all that. But, we've gone through this a while, and I'm thinking to myself, I think people should go over and check out the work over at your Substack and also the podcast, right, which both are under the same name, The Final Cut. Am I correct?
Final Cut, right? That's right.
So,
Final Cut is my newsletter. It's on allanier.substack.com.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the podcast can be found at Substack, allanier.substack.com, and on Spotify. If you don't want to listen to my podcast on Substack, you can go to Spotify to listen to it.
No problem.
It's called Final Cut.
So you can get The Final Cut through Spotify as a podcast, and you can also go over to Substack and read it. Like I said, he's also on Twitter, X, whatever, and Instagram and all that. And, yeah, follow it. This is an interesting thing. Ultimately, where are you going with this, though? Are you going to wind up doing various aspects of film and stuff like that? Is that going to become the thing now for a while? Because it seems like over the past few years, you've been leaning into maybe I should get back into critiquing films, retro reviews. Is this where we're going? Albert Lanier, the film writer? Is that where we're going?
Well, it seems like it is. Strangely enough, I'm working on another podcast right now, which is about sports.
Oh, okay.
Which has kept me busy. But that's what's been the movement, the forward momentum. So I went back with Final Cut, the newsletter, to writing about movies, and I've enjoyed that. But I'm also did the podcast as a promotional vehicle and also as a companion piece to the newsletter. And at this point, this is unexpected. I didn't really expect to create a story structure. I'm the last person I would ever think of to create a screenwriting story structure or a couple of structures. So this came as a surprise to me. And really, the reality with this was the reason that I came out with this was I was supposed to actually go to a film festival in Las Vegas this past October.
Okay.
A friend of mine who's interviewed for Final Cut. That I interviewed on my Final Cut podcast and also on my newsletter. So what happened was that I wasn't able to do it because I've been working on this other podcast that I'm doing. But I told her, well, because she does workshops as well. I said, I'll do a workshop. I'll come out and try to do a workshop. And so when I came up with this concept of dual story structure, I thought, oh, this will work for a workshop. I can do this as a workshop. So what this is intended to be, actually taught as a workshop or a seminar.
Okay.
And that's really what's intended to. I reluctantly kind of wrote the intro essay to this because I felt you got to write something because you're dealing with writing here. You might as well get it down on text form. And that's what I did. So I'm looking to do this either at film festivals or possibly at Comic-Cons. I think Comic-Cons would be interesting. Conventions would be interesting because I think you have a potential audience of people who might be interested in making movies.
Right.
So I'm interested. I'm open to doing it at Comic-Cons. I'm open to doing it at film festivals. I'm also open to doing it as a standalone seminar and standalone workshop, no matter where. So set in a hotel or wherever it would be set up. So people are interested. If entities, if film festivals, Comic-Cons, or I don't know what it would be, groups or other people are interested, they can contact me at my email, which is at ImperiousReader. It's ImperiousReader@gmail.com. That's ImperiousReader@gmail. ImperiousReader@gmail.
There you go. And sometime in the next couple weeks, couple months, I don't know, probably in 2025, we'll bring you back and talk about what else is going on. And who knows, maybe discuss that sports podcast coming up next. You know, I produce a couple of podcasts and such outside of my own. And yeah, I mean, let's keep track of this as it goes. Let me know where it's going. I mean, filmmaking, the creation of this stuff is always of interest to me. So I'll give you guys all the links in with the show notes for Albert Lanier's work on Substack, on Spotify. The podcast is there. And, you know, we'll catch up again real soon. So until next time, guys, I am merely Ochelli. All of you are the effect. Good night.
Ochelli.com. Do you like history? Real history that you were never taught in schools? Why? The Vietnam War, nuclear bombs and nation building in Southeast Asia by author Mike Swanson with new documentation never seen before that'll open your eyes to events that led up to this. Why? The Vietnam War, nuclear bombs and nation building in Southeast Asia, 1945 through 1961. Get your copy today at Amazon.com. Why? The Vietnam War by author Mike Swanson.
The Ochelli.com radio network.
The War State by Michael Swanson explains the great national transformation that took place and put the Kennedy presidency in the context of the times and reveals never-before published information about the Cuban Missile Crisis. President Kennedy would not have been assassinated if he had been president 200 years ago. His assassination took place in the context of the Cold War and the rise of the national security state. Before World War II, the United States was a continental republic. In the decade that followed, it became an imperial superpower. Generals such as Curtis LeMay not only wanted to invade Cuba, but knew that there were short-range missiles on the island armed with nuclear warheads that they could not destroy because they were on mobile launchers. Their invasion could have led to a third world war, and they wanted to go to war anyway. The War State by Michael Swanson reveals why and will show you what President Kennedy was up against. For more information, thewarstate.com.
Go ahead, caller.
I'm interested in the truth about the JFK assassination.
Right. Well, what do you want to know?
Judy Baker's wild claim, Oswald girlfriend, she knew Ruby and Barry, cancer weapons. Really?
I imagine I could claim I have 4 wheels. It doesn't make me a wagon, but okay.
Oswald was on the kill team and trying to prevent the murder of John Kennedy. Come on now. Has a real expert on the JFK assassination looked into her claims?
Go to Amazon.com, enter Judith Baker in her own words. You'll get results for a digital copy of a book where Walt Brown utilizes her own words and the known evidence in the case to get at, well, a different perspective, let's say. You can get Judith Barry Baker in her own words from the author himself, signed if you request it by contacting Dr. Brown at KIASJFK@AOL.com. It's a fun book and it actually dissects the many, many fantastic claims. Judith Barry Baker in her own words.
Thank you for all the great information.
Yo, this is Doug Campbell, host of the Dallas Action Podcast presented by Wall Street Window. And you are listening to the Ochelli Effect, revelation through conversation.
The views expressed by callers, hosts, or anyone else who happens to get on the air at Ochelli.com do not necessarily reflect the views of Ochelli.com or Chuck Ochelli, and we are not responsible for any stupidity which might ensue. Thank you.
Uncle, do you remember that time when Benjamin Fulford said that an Asian secret society was going to dispatch ninjas to take down the Illuminati?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, in the cartoon.
Yeah, did that ever work out too good?
No.
It didn't, did it?
Didn't work.
But here on Ochelli.com radio network, things work out a bit better, don't they?
Much better.
Much better.
It's clearer and understanding about the programs. The programs are much clearer. Getting live people into it. They really have a good conversation going.
Much better.
Much better scene.
I say forget Benjamin Fulford and his ninjas and listen to the Ochelli.com radio network.
I agree. It's straight to the point.
Straight talk.
And I like that idea.
Ochelli.com.
Revelation through conversation.
Nuclear holocaust. You know what uranium is, right? It's a thing called nuclear weapons and other things, like lots of... You know what uranium is, right? Bad things. Things are done with uranium, including some bad things. Nuclear holocaust. You know what uranium is, right? I've been briefed. Nuclear holocaust. Nuclear holocaust. You know what uranium is, right? It's a thing called nuclear weapons and other things, like lots of... You know what uranium is, right? Bad things. Things are done with uranium, including some bad things. Nuclear holocaust. Nuclear holocaust. Nuclear holocaust. Nuclear holocaust. Nuclear holocaust.
Hunter Biden is the talk of the town this week. Being a central character in the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war plot that has spanned now for over a decade. And after impeachments, laptop scandals, a fucked election, more impeachments, and then a war, the man behind the mini M&Ms gets to walk free of anything that can be used against him.